we are on 21b. And where did we get up to? So we're about a little more than halfway down. Right across from the Tosfot that starts my. It's probably about 20 lines up from the bottom. So we're still discussing what is the reason for that the rabbis made the secondary erva, the secondary prohibition regarding the your uncle's wife on your mother's side, your uncle on your mother's side, so your mother's maternal brother, his wife. So why is that? So from Torah law, that's not a prohibition, but we saw a couple of possible reasons why the rabbis would have forbidden that, and now we're going to continue with that. So what we're trying to determine is, so there's no prohibition because it's on the mother, it's a maternal side relation, and this would only be prohibited on the father side relation. But just like we saw with everybody calls grandma regardless of whether it's a maternal or paternal grandmother. Would that apply to the uncle as well? Everybody calls him uncle, and everybody calls his wife aunt. So was that why? That could be why the rabbis would say, don't distinguish between maternal side or paternal side. Okay, Tashma, here's a proof. When Rabbi Yehuda came, he said to Babylonia, he said, they say in the West, in Palestine, wherever you have a female that is an erva relationship, a forbidden relationship, if you have the same relationship on a male, then that male's wife is also forbidden by the rabbis. And Rabbi said, is it really a rule? Here's a counterexample. Your mother-in-law is forbidden. But the wife of your father-in-law, who's not your mother, obviously, or your wife's mother, but another wife of your father-in-law, she's permitted. So here's a case where if it's, there is a distinction between if it's maternal or paternal side. And another example, Bas Chamoso Erva, the daughter of your mother-in-law is forbidden. Eishes ben Chamoso Materis, but your mother-in-law's son's wife is permitted. Right? Another example, Bas Chami Erva, the daughter of your father-in-law, is forbidden. Eishes ben Chami Muteris, but if it's a son on your father-in-law's side, then his wife is permitted. Another example, there's tons of examples here, right? Charagto Erva, Charagto is what, a stepson, I think, right? Your wife's daughter, so your stepdaughter is forbidden. Eishes Chargo Materis, but your stepson's wife is okay. So obviously, if he's no longer married to her. Bas Charagto. Another example is your stepdaughter is forbidden. Eishes ben Chargo Materis, but your stepson's wife is permitted. V'hadro Yehuda bar Shela Luciamai. So like what's Rabbi Yehuda bar Shela talking about, right? That it's always that if the relationship is through a male rather than a female, then the rabbis forbade it. That's clearly not the case. Lav Lucia Esha Sachia Eminav. So what could he have been referring to? The specific case of your maternal uncle's wife, so your aunt by marriage. That's what he's referring to. The kol shebekeva erba, when that is on the mother's side, it is forbidden. The zochar goes ral isha mishum ishniya. But if it's so then the rabbi said, you know what? If it's a paternal uncle, then his wife is also forbidden, even though from the Torah it's not. Again, for the reason we said before, that everybody calls her aunt. So you'd come to think that it's not a forbidden relationship even on the mother's side. So Maishna Hane, Maishna Ha. So why is that different? Like we've got all these other counterexamples where it matters if the relationship is through the father or the mother. So my answer is Ha Bechad Kiddushin Mekarvla. There's only in the case of your maternal uncle's wife, right? There's only one marriage that connects you, right? So it's not that your mother's brother is related to her and to you by marriage. That's a blood relationship, right? But if it's on your father's side, your father's sister-in-law or brother-in-law, then that's two marriages that connect you. So in all the other cases that we discuss, it's like you're married to your wife has a son, the son is married to another woman, right?
Yeah.
Your daughter-in-law relationship. So that there the relationship depends on two. Is like 2 degrees removed, right? You married your wife's son married somebody else's too. So that's when the rabbi said, you know what, this is not an issue, right? But if there's only one marriage connecting you, right, that it's a blood relationship up till that one marriage, then the rabbis ruled against it. Okay. Rav Mishasha sent this question to Rav Papi. Yolamdeinu Rabbeinu, teach us. Eishes achi avi ha'av. The wife of your father's brother, so your uncle on your father's side, his wife, so your aunt by marriage, v'achos avihav, and the sister of your grandfather on your father's side, so your father's sister, so your father's aunt. Well, what about that? Are they secondary or not? So on one hand, the next generation woman is an erba, right? So in the case of the grandfather of the great aunt, so your grandfather's daughter is forbidden, right? So Lamala now he goes her base. So maybe anybody else connected to your grandfather, even just by marriage, should also be forbidden. So your grandfather's wife. Maybe it's like it's too far away, right? It's with a relationship. Tashma, let's prove it. Mayin shnios. What are these secondary prohibitions? And didn't. So when we had the Mishnah that said or not the Mishnah, but the Brisa above that listed what are the secondary prohibitions, it listed 8 relationships and didn't list these 2, right? This grandfather's wife. So maybe that implies that it's not, right? By listing 8 and you leave out 2. So the Gemara says, no, ton of Bashir, you left out. It wasn't necessarily an exhaustive list. My shir, I share. What? So, like you can't just leave out one. Shir shnios devei. There were other things that were. That's a strange question because actually we're talking about leaving out 2. But okay. But anyway, the Gemara says there are lots of other ones that are left out. Shir shnios devei Rabbi Chia. There's a Rabbi Chia had, and we're going to come to that today. So shortly. A list of 6 more that were left out by that brisa, but Rabbi Chia says are still considered secondary arayos. So fine. Amemar achshar be'eshes achi avi aviv. Amemar, he said it was okay to marry your paternal grandfather's brother, so your great uncle's wife. He said that was okay. Ba'achos avi aviv, and also his sister, your great uncle's sister, obviously a half sister to your father, to your grandfather. Amalei Rav Hillel Rashi. So Rav Hillel asked Rashi, I once saw the list of the secondary prohibitions that was kept by Mar. There were 16 secondary prohibitions. My love, Tamani Damasniso. So how you get 16? Well, our Brisa listed 8. Bishis to Rabbi Chia, then Rabbi Chia, as we'll soon see, had 6 more, that makes 14. And these 2 that we're discussing, that makes 16. So that implies that these two relationships are forbidden. So how come he permitted them? So Rashi answers, if that's the case, really there should be 17. Why? What about your maternal uncle's wife? Right, the Pashin and Lisura that we decided we've seen above that is forbidden, so it should be 17. So like the number is going to be off anyway. So don't tell me that these two cases must be included. So Rav Hillel says, "Oh, kasha, no, that's not a good question." The two that we're talking about, the grandfather, paternal grandfather's sister, for example, the Damyan Ladali, they're similar to each other. That's considered like one. Okay, because they're both related through the paternal grandfather. That's pretty strange because a lot of the other ones are similar too. But okay, I don't follow the logic, but fine. So you have 16 if you count these two as one. And anyway, I saw them written down as 16 cases. So that does prove that that the two are forbidden. So he says the answer back. All right, so you want to say these two are like one. You have a ksiva hatera. Okay, so you're saying that there were 16, so I'm going to figure that these two were included in the 16. These two cases. If it were the other way around, if there were a list of permitted ones, and you were kind of guessing at which were the permitted ones, would that be sufficient to permit someone that might be forbidden? I don't think so. Because then you would have said, you know what? He had a list of 16. Doesn't mean he endorsed the list of 16. You might say he had a list, but he didn't endorse the list, right? So don't try to read too much into the fact that he had this list. So one of these 6 relationships forbidden by Rav Chia. The Shalishi Shabivno, a third generation, so a grandchild, on your son's side, Vishabivto, and 1 second. So that is your son's daughter, right? So since your son's daughter is 1 generation removed from you, so your grandson's daughter is on Rav Chia's list. Okay, so in other words, go down further generations following the same kind of relationship. That's a shnia. That's a rabbinically prohibited relationship. Vishavivto, also involving your daughter, Vishabavan Ishto, Vishabavas Ishto, and your stepson and stepdaughter. Shnia, those are all secondary prohibitions. Revi Shebachami Vishabachamaso, a 4th generation, through your father-in-law. Now we're going up the ancestry ladder. So your father-in-law, your mother-in-law, and their parents and grandparents, that their grandparents are a secondary prohibition. I'm only reading Rashi. So Ravina says, why do you go up 4 generations going up, but only 3 going down? So Lamala, the Suramikoch Ishtokase, going up, what's the chain? Like, how do you get to that branch of the family? Through your marriage to your wife, right? So Hashiva. So that is a more significant, but Lamata going down the generations, the Suramikoch Ishtokase, it's it doesn't, like, if it's your son or your daughter, it doesn't matter who the mother was, right? It's yours. It's like your blood relation, right? So then, loka hashiva. Well, so actually, it's less significant because it may be your relationship, but there's no issue of being related to your wife. So somehow, a prohibition that comes through the fact that you are married to your wife, makes the degree of the prohibition more significant. Okay, which I could have argued the other way too, right? As I attempted incorrectly. Okay. So what about your wife's son, your stepson? or your stepdaughter. That's because of your marriage to your wife. That's how you're related to these people, your stepchildren. And then we don't say that those people are forbidden to you. So I did a tana shlosha daros lamata didei v'lo chashava. So since we were talking about the three generations below, and we did not include the son and the daughter. So we didn't include that. It was just a stylistic thing. So indeed, the degree of severity, it does go, would include the stepchildren, but there's no parallelism in the cases that we're discussing, so it didn't mention that. Rashi asks, Shnios devei Rabbi Chia. So these Rabbi Chia's list of 6. Yeshlan hefsek, going lemon hefsek. What happens when you're no longer married when they're no longer married to the relative in question, right? Because we're talking about the wife of your maternal uncle, right? What happens when that marriage dissolves? Is that woman still forbidden to you or not? Tashma, let's see if we get a proof. Yamar Rav. Rav said, four women that once the marriage dissolves and you're no longer related to them by marriage, then the woman is now permitted to you. But too low. There are only 4 of these cases and no more. So that implies that Rav Chia's cases, there is it's an enduring prohibition. So Mara says, well, that's not a good proof. Dilma kikama Rav lahim asisa. Maybe he wasn't saying it's an absolute number. He was talking about the cases that we're talking about. There's 4 of them that have that the prohibition does get canceled when the marriage dissolves. Not a good proof. Tashma, here's another proof. Shlishi Ravi. There's 3 generations going down and 4 generations going up. We just saw Shlishi Ravi in Tfelo. No more than that. You don't go up 5 generations or down 4 generations. So that would imply that so that doesn't talk about if the marriage dissolves, but it's saying that there is a limit. Like this relationship is not so significant that it keeps going up the ladder, keep going down the ladder. So now we're kind of reinterpreting the phrase hefsek, like there is a stop, an end to this, not necessarily through the end of the marriage in question, but through the distance of how many generations to the relationship. So maybe this implies that there is a stop to like a limit to how close this relationship needs to be. So Gemara says, no, Dilma mishlishi ve'elech mervi ve'elech. No, maybe it wasn't being specific when it said 3 generations or 4 generations. It was just listing scenarios. But really it means that that another degree of distance, like another generation up or down, would still be forbidden. So there's no proof there. Rava said to Rav Nachman, Chazimar Haime Rabbanan Dasimim Rava. Did you see that somebody came from the west, from Palestine, V'Amar, and he said, Bob Marava, they asked a question there. Gazru Shnios Begerim. Oh, lo Gazru Shnios Begerim. What about the case of a convert, right? Somebody converts to Judaism. Now do his relationships, his family relationships to those of his original faith, right, to his original family, do they still count? Now, we're not asking biblically, you still can't sleep with your mother, even if you converted, right? But these were prohibitions. Do they still count? Are we still concerned about that? Amarlai, so he answered, Hashna, Umayr Vagufa, Ilav Shalo Yomru, Bain Mikdusha Hamur Kedusha Kala. Like, what is the whole reason that we would say that you still can't sleep with your mother if you convert? So, you and I would say, like, what, are you kidding me? But the truth is that the halachic principle here is that a katan shenol adami, that a person who converts, he's considered like a new person. His pre-family relationships are not taken into consideration. But why do we still say that the ger can't marry his mother, right? His non-Jewish mother, because it's not a good look, right? It's like, oh, so before you wouldn't let him marry while he was a non-Jew, you wouldn't let him marry his mother, and now that he's Jewish, it's okay, right? That's not a good look. So so if the whole reason is, the real reason is that it's just not a good look, right? So when it comes to rabbinic things, it's like, uh, we wouldn't apply that to the secondary prohibitions, because the secondary prohibitions, they certainly don't apply because you're a convert, and you're not, these people are not halachically considered to be related to you, so we wouldn't think that the rabbis would make that enact these secondary prohibitions. Continuing about converts, Gerim Hoavasul Yadan. Now that we're talking about converts, Neimon Buhu Milsa. Let me tell you something else about converts. Achin min ha'em lo ya'idu. So two brothers cannot be a pair of witnesses, right? They're too close a relationship. But what about two brothers who converted to Judaism, right? So are they no longer considered brothers? So they shouldn't give testimony. But if they did give testimony, it's considered valid. In other words, they're not considered related. But paternal brothers who converted, then we have no problem at all. They're completely okay for testifying together as non-related people. Okay. So I think what the reason for this is apparently that there's a verse in Yechezkel that that the Egyptians, like denigrating the ancient Egyptians, that their children are like the children of horses. In other words, that the paternal relationship there is not to be considered. So that's why we don't even acknowledge at all the parentage, the male parentage of non-Jews. Okay, it's kind of denigrating, really, but all right. Amemar says no, it doesn't matter. Even maternal brothers, they can be witnesses together. Why is that? So why we have different rule for, like, why don't we say, just like we say about forbidden relationships, why don't we say, oh, so when they were not Jewish, they're considered brothers, and now they're not considered brothers? Why don't we say that? So Ervol Kol Masura, because the prohibition of who you can marry, like, everybody has to know about that, right? Like, you have to know who you can marry, right? Edu Slabes Masura, but who's qualified to give testimony, that takes place in the court. The people in the court are considered to be they know the rules, and so they can apply the rules more judiciously, and we don't have to worry about them getting it mixed up. And the principle is the ger, the convert, is considered like a new person with no pre-existing relatives. Okay, next Mishnah. How are we going for time? We're a little behind. Person has a brother, maternal, paternal, any kind. So his, if he dies, so his brother's wife, his brother dies, then the brother's wife is tied to him. This is the term zika, right, which we had before. Like, there's a connection there, even before he does yibum. And it's considered a brother. Unless you have a brother from either where your common mother is a slave or a non-Jew. So then that's not considered a sibling relationship. Similarly, if you have a son, Poster Eishes Aviv Mina Yibum. So Yibum only applies to a person a man who dies childless. But if you have any kind of son, then there's no Yibum situation. Chutz, sorry, no Chutz. Poster Eishes Aviv Mina Yibum. So then there's no Yibum necessary. And that son, no matter how, if it's your son, it's your son, no matter who the mother is, and that son is forbidden from hitting you or cursing you. Right? That's a rule in the Torah that you can't curse or hit your parents. And this is your son, but there's exceptions. Same thing if you have a son with a slave or and we're talking about a non-Jewish slave, right? Or with a non-Jew, then that is not considered a son. Okay, only through a Jewish mother. So first the Gemara says Mikol Makom, what it means like any kind of brother. Like what is that including? It means even a mamzer, right? So you slept with a forbidden, with like someone else's wife, would be the classic case, who's Jewish. So the child is a mamzer, but still is your child, right? And the rules still apply. That it's considered that you have a child. Pshita Achifus, so this is obvious, right? Like what do you have to say? Like include this, even this. Obviously, it's your son. Maybe we would consider this like the sons of Yaakov. So remember, Yaakov had 4 wives. 2 were, I guess we would consider Jewish, and 2 were slaves, right? They were the servants of his primary wives, and yet they all refer to themselves as brothers, right? When they stand before Joseph, they say we're 12 brothers, so they consider themselves full brothers. Malang Sharon Lopsuin. So Afkang Sharon Lopsuin. Maybe brothers means like so none of them were mamzeri, right? So they may have been children of the servants, but they didn't have the lineage of a mamzer, right? So maybe like that's why they could say they're brothers, but maybe you would think that if one of them was a mamzer, he wouldn't have been considered a brother. Kamashmalin tells you that no, even a mamzer is considered a brother or a son. Well, maybe that's the case. Like, how do you know that a mamzer is considered a full-fledged son? Since that regarding yibum, like we know that the rule is if you have a son, even a mamzer son, there's no need to do yibum. So miskak namizaki. So the fact that you can do yibum means that the whole procedure of yibum, like from the detail of the woman is tied to you until you do, even before you do yibum, that applies as well, even for a mamzer. A little bit like weird logic. Okay. So the Mishnah said he's your full brother in every matter. So what is again? It's an inclusive clause for anything, right? For what? What do you mean for anything? The Yarsha that even the mamzer gets to inherit, gets an equal share in the inheritance, and if the family is a Kohen, Kohen cannot become Tameh except to a immediate relative, right? To attend the funeral and deal with a blood relative, one of the 7 relationships, which is a brother. So even if the brother is a mamzer, the Kohen brother can still can become Tameh by dealing with his death. So Pshita Achifus says obviously, like there's no. Why would you think that there's an exception for a mamzer? So Saket I might have thought the Torah says who can a Kohen become Tameh? To a relative who is close to him. The Amar She'ero Zu Ishto. And what does She'ero mean? Like his wife. So there's only 6 when the Torah lists the relatives that you can become tamei to, it doesn't specifically list the wife, but by saying lishe'ero, which I'm not even sure how to translate here. Translate your flesh, right? Your own flesh and blood. That even includes your wife. So that means your wife. That a husband shouldn't make himself tamei to one who cancels his kahuna, to desecrates his priesthood. So yesh bal shemitame, yesh bal she'emitame. There is some so it's telling you that in some cases the husband does not become tamei for his wife who passed away. Okay, so how's that? That you if it's a valid wife, a legal wife for a kohen, then he can become tamei to her. But if it's an illegal wife, like she was a divorcee, and the kohen is not allowed to marry the divorcee, and he marries her anyway, and she dies, he can't become tamei to her. That's not a real wife, as it were. So I might say here too, that there's some brothers that you can become tamei to and some not, right? If it's a brother, then maybe not. So the Mishnah says no, that's not the case. That a brother is a brother regardless of his parentage. How do you know? Because in the case of the Kohen's wife, his illegal wife, like his divorcee wife, he's under obligation to divorce her, right? So the fact that she dies as his wife, it's like, that's not such a good wife. You were supposed to divorce her before she died. So but a brother is a brother. You can't dissolve that relationship, right? Despite the fact that he's a mamzer, there's no way that you can undo that bond. So that's a bond which which we consider even though he is a mamzer. And the Mishnah said, now the exception, a brother from a non-Jew is not considered a brother. My tama, why not? Because the woman who's the slave and her children belong to the master, and they don't belong to you, right? In other words, taking that phrase to mean that there's no family relationship; it's an ownership relationship. So then the Mishnah continued, what about the son, right? Any kind of son is a son. What does it mean, any kind of son? Who's a mom, right? My tama, why? A person dies without a child, right? This is the whole thing of Ibram, is a person dies with no child. So it's a play on words. Ubein ein lo, a son he has not. The word ein with an aleph can also be read as ayin with an ayin, which means like examine, right? Like examine the examine this person's like parentage, like you have to search for the son. So often, obviously, the person has an illegitimate son. He might deny it or kind of try to hide the relationship. No, you have to really check into this guy's history and see, did he have a son, even an illegitimate son? So that implies that would make a difference. If he had an illegitimate son, then there's no requirement for you. So then the Mishnah said that such a son, an illegitimate son, he is also prohibited from hitting or striking or cursing his father. Amai, why? Karikan v'nasiv yamcha lo ta'ar. You should say that when it comes to cursing, so you can't curse your father, but you know who else you can't curse? Nasiba amcha, prince among your people, right? Like a leader, right? So ba'ose mase amcha. That implies that only of your people, right? If you're behaving according to the standards of your people, you can't be cursed. So this child was conceived, not according to the standards, right? So maybe maybe we should say that he's not covered by this prohibition of cursing the father. So my answer is Kedamar Pinchas Mishay Rav Papa. Pinchas said, but also true. But we're talking about where in a different case where a person has done has repented. Hachinami Kishasa Tshuva. Like the we can assume that the father regrets having fathered this child, this illegitimate child, which he should not have done. So that relationship, we're going to assume that relationship is a solid one, right? So Gemara says, "Oh, hi Bar Tshuva, who can you repent? Can you repent for that?" Like just yesterday, we saw a case where you can only do full repentance if you can make up for it, right? Like with the case of the businessman who has false weights, right? Like how do you can't make up for it because you can't do tshuva because you don't know who you cheated. And we have a Mishnah. What is a classic case of an error that can't be repaired? Holy mamzer, a person who sires a mamzer. All right, so you can't fix that, right? But okay, so you can't fix the situation, but by repenting, you could at least say that I'm with my people again. I'm living according to the standards. I made a mistake, and now I'm not going to do it again, or I regret the mistake. So we would still say that you're a person who is now behaving appropriately, and therefore the rule that your son shouldn't hit you applies to you. Okay, Tana Rabba, the rabbis do. If you sleep with your sister, who is your paternal, your sister, your half sister through your father's wife. Okay, so your paternal sister, yeah. Chayav mishum achoso umishum basesha savi. So she's your sister. That's one count against you, and she's your father's wife's daughter. So second count against you. It's two separate transgressions. There's only one transgression here. It's your sister, and we don't consider the fact that she also is the daughter of your father's wife. So, my Tamai Draban, what's the reason for the dispute? I'm ready. The rabbis would say, the Torah says you can't sleep with your sister, whether it's maternal or paternal. So then, lamali. So why does it also need to say your father's wife's daughter? That's your half sister. We already know that. Why does it say that? It tells you that to tell you that you've got two angles here that you're liable for. She's not only your half sister; she's your father's wife's daughter. So that there's two. Basically, it's like two prohibitions apply to the same person. What would he say? The Torah says she's your sister. That no, by the Torah saying, like reiterating, you can't sleep with this sister. She's your sister, right? By reiterating that, it's saying that only because she's your sister and not because of the other reason that she's also through your father's wife. Rabban. So what do the rabbis do with this extra, she's your sister? What do they do with those extra words? That's if you are sleeping with a full sister, right? Who's your full sister through your father and your mother. And so, like, isn't that obvious, right? Like it says your half sister you can't sleep with, so your full sister. Why does that have to tell you that? It tells you that these prohibitions you can't apply logic to say, oh, this should also apply to a full sister, right? No, the Torah has to tell you what's forbidden. You can't go around just applying logic saying, oh, that maybe if the Torah says A, it must have also meant B. You don't do that. It's only the Torah would have to say A and B. That's why it says she's your sister, meaning to include the case where she's your full sister. So what's Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda's response? In Cain, if that's so, you could say, achoscha, your sister. She is your sister is an extra word. So I still can say that she is your sister, and that's the only reason that you're prohibited from her Rabbana. So the rabbis like, isn't that the case? That there's two extra words here. No, the rabbis say it has to say she is your sister. The extra word. Why? So that you wouldn't say that okay, here it's an exception, and the Torah has to tell you in the case of erva, in the case of forbidden relationships, the Torah has to tell you specifically. But maybe everywhere else in the Torah you could, extend rules through logical means. No, so that's why it gives you this extra word to tell you apply this rule in the whole Torah. Why does the Torah write your sister of all? Doesn't that tell you that you don't? Doesn't that tell you, so Milsa da Asya Bakal B'chomer Tarach B'Kosav L'Kra. Yeah, maybe you would think that sometimes the Torah does tell you, things that didn't have to tell you. Really, you could have figured this out for yourself, right? But sometimes the Torah tells you anyway. Okay, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, what would Rabbi Yossi say? Cain, that's the case. La achoschahi beidach kra. Like, why does it say the term achoschahi, she's your sister, in the separate verse? So this is the logic here escapes me as well, but since it's written in a separate verse, it must be telling you that when you sleep with your father's daughter, then you get, Rabbi Yossi's derivation, which is you've only got the one problem. Okay. Okay, I think we're going to stop here.
Good.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a good day, Doug.
You too. Bye.